Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Russia has warned NATO and European powers of a decisive response if alliance violates its airspace, according to Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and he has told the UN General Assembly. Amid growing tensions over repeated airspace violations and escalating clashes, while Ukraine has confirmed that Israel provided a US-made Patriot air defense system for the first time. Hamas has stated that it has not received US President Donald Trump's ceasefire plan as Israeli forces have intensified their assault on Gaza. Meanwhile, the Gaza Health Ministry reported 74 killed in Gaza. This comes as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet President Donald Trump in Washington on coming Monday. The U.S. State Department has announced it will revoke Colombian President Gustavo Petro's visa after his comments were reported from a pro-Palestinian protest in New York, condemning recent U.S. strikes in the Caribbean that killed some people. Petro has now returned to Bogota, declaring that he does not care. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has called on all UN member states to immediately implement the restored UN sanctions against Iran. The UN sanctions against Iran have now snapped back into force for the first time since 2015, sending the Iranian rial to a record 1.12 million per dollar. Germany, France, and Britain have all warned against Iran against escalating action, while President Masoud Pezeshkian has rejected U.S. demands to hand over enriched uranium. Meanwhile, Russia and China have both refused to recognize the sanctions. The U.S. President Donald Trump have now authorized full-force troop deployment for Portland to protect ICE facilities from what he calls domestic terrorists, defying Democratic leaders including Oregon Governor Tina Kotek and Portland Mayor Keith Wilson, who has both denounced the move. Vietnam has now evacuated thousands and also shut airports as Typhoon Bua Loi, with winds up to 133 km per hour, are approaching central regions, expected to make landfall today. The storm followed deadly flooding in the Philippines that killed at least 10 people, prompting urgent precautions in Vietnam. Thousands have marched in Buenos Aires demanding justice for Lara Gutierrez, who was 15 years old, and her two cousins who were tortured and murdered in a crime allegedly live-streamed to 45 viewers on Instagram. Argentine authorities have arrested 5 suspects, while other suspect remains at large. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has issued a stark warning at the United Nations General Assembly, saying any aggression against Moscow will be met with a decisive response. Lavrov further denied that Russia has any intention of attacking NATO or EU nations, calling such claims provocations. He further said threats against Russia are becoming more common and warned Western nations not to underestimate Russia's resolve. This comes after growing tensions in Europe, with Estonia accusing Russia of airspace violations and NATO responding to Russian drone incursions over Poland. Denmark also reported drones over its airports but found no direct evidence of Russian involvement. Lavrov has also hit out at U.S. President Donald Trump, who recently backed calls to shoot down Russian planes violating NATO airspace. Further added that Russia sees the U.S. as unwilling to resolve the Ukraine crisis diplomatically, but expressed hope for more pragmatic cooperation. Let's listen into what the Russian foreign minister has said.
Более того, все чаще звучат угрозы применения силы против России, которая обвиняет в том, что она чуть ли не планирует напасть на Североатлантический альянс и Евросоюз. Президент Путин не раз развенчивал подобные провокации. У России не было и нет подобных намерений, однако любая агрессия против моей страны получит решительный отпор.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Scott Faulkner. He's the head of Eagle Enterprises, a security firm, joins us live from Washington. Thank you very much, Scott, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now looking at Lavrov's comments towards EU as well as Washington, D.C., what do you think what can come next?
Well, first of all, if Lavrov stood up at the UN and said the sun rose in the east, I'd get a second opinion. I don't believe a thing he says. He's a mouthpiece for Putin. It's all propaganda, and I think we should take what he says with a grain of salt. His saber rattling is sort of desperate because it's been a very bad week for Russia. On one front, all of their incursions into NATO airspace has been met with force. I mean, people are, instead of intimidating the western boundary of Russia or the eastern boundary of NATO, you've got a much stronger solidarity and commitment to defend their airspace. I don't think that Russia, especially Putin, was expecting that Finland and Denmark and Estonia and all these other countries were going to be as strong in their response, certainly rhetorically, as they are. The other part is Ukraine is on a roll right now. I mean, first of all, Trump seems to have finally awakened to Putin being the bad guy and is making a lot more noises on behalf of Ukraine and against Putin. Ukraine has been attacking very successfully a lot of the oil infrastructure of Russia, which is going to really hit them where it hurts, so to speak. And then the last 24 hours down in the Donetsk area, you have a salient that the Russians had pushed forward on has been surrounded by Ukrainian forces. And so in addition to several thousand Russian casualties, there's another 3,000 Russians about to be captured by Ukrainian forces. So it's been a pretty bad week for Putin and his henchmen. And and I think Lavrov is saber rattling is really out of desperation.
And Scott, furthermore, yes, keeping that in mind that, like you said, President Trump might have been more optimistic in the past about diplomatically solving this issue, but now he's seeing Russia's colors or intentions. Do you think President Trump will still proceed with trying to negotiate peace between Ukraine and Russia?
Trump is a holistic thinker, so he's going to be looking at all the avenues, both overt and behind the scenes. But I think he also realizes that with Ukraine now starting to show a lot of effectiveness in their offensives, that it may be the map that ultimately determines the future, not the table.
And what about what do you think? How will NATO move with this Sergei Lavrov's warning of a decisive response? Do you think they will directly maybe comment in upcoming days on this comment made by him?
Oh, I'm sure they will. I'm sure that both the NATO foreign ministers, the generals, and certainly the actual national leaders of some of these NATO countries will step up and say, you know, we are not going to be intimidated, that if you come into our space, we're going to shoot down your drones. If you come into our space with your planes, we're going to shoot them down. This could be obviously very dicey on some fronts because, shooting down drones is one thing. Shooting down planes where you have a human in the cockpit is quite another. So it'll be interesting to see whether NATO will cross that line if Russia crosses that line.
Right. With that, I would like to thank our guest Scott Faulkner for joining us and sharing your insight all the way from US. Now we move on. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar on Thursday at the 80th UN General Assembly has sharply criticized Pakistan for being a long-standing hub of international terrorism. Jaishankar further emphasized the need to confront threats while asserting national rights, while also accusing that major international terrorist attacks are traced back to that one country. According to Jaishankar, India sees tariff volatility and uncertain market access, remarks that come amid US President Donald Trump's tariff policies. He also further noted that as decolonization advanced, UN membership quadrupled, its remit expanded, and new priorities such as development, climate change, trade, food, and health access came to the fore. Let's listen into what he has said.
Madam President, Excellencies, while asserting our rights, we must also firmly face up to threats. Countering terrorism is a particular priority because it synthesizes bigotry, violence, intolerance, and fear. India has confronted this challenge since independence, having a neighbor that is an epicenter of global terrorism. For decades now, major international terrorist attacks are traced back to that one country. UN's designated lists of terrorists are replete with its nationals. The most recent example of cross-border barbarism was the murder of innocent tourists in Pahalgam in April this year. India exercised its right to defend its people against terrorism and brought its organizers and perpetrators to justice.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by retired Major General Sudhakarji. He's a senior geopolitical and strategic defense expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Sudhakarji, for joining us again. Major General Sudhakarji, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, in what ways might the challenges of tariff volatility towards India, also the uncertain market access, affect current India's trade and economic policies with the US particularly?
Yeah, Soma, good morning. It's an excellent point raised by you. I would say that multilateralism is under threat by virtue of protectionism and also the trade barriers and the non-tariff barriers. All these things are going to make the trading system volatile activity and further lead to price rise, inflation, hyperinflation, unemployment, and gross instability in the world economy. So in order to protect one nation's interest, one cannot afford to destabilize the very concept of multilateralism, which is emerging as an order of the day in 21st century. And towards that end, I would compliment the Minister of External Affairs of India for having spoken his heart out and brought out the pragmatic necessity of today's world order to safeguard the very concept based on which the world order can emerge and satisfy the multipolarity demands, be it economy, be it climate change, be it the price rise of fuel, fertilizer, and also the security paradigm. So therefore, he has urged the nations to come together and make sure that this very concept is protected from all angles. Back to you, Asun.
With that, I would like to thank Major General Sudhakarji for joining us and sharing that insight. Now, my colleague Thomas Porteous has filed a report from Ground Zero wrapping up the UNGA 80th week. Let's take a look.
And so you join us here as we wrap up a week at the United Nations General Assembly here in New York City. You are watching NewsX World and I have been Thomas Porteous, and we are about to tune in to S. Jaishankar's speech where he will put India's message at the forefront on the world stage. Of course, we don't know what he is about to say that, but his meetings previous to this that he has held here in New York can give us some inkling. We can expect him to push for a counter on global and cross-border terrorism. Of course, this has been central to both his BRICS meetings and his foreign ministers' meetings, in which he met leaders from and foreign ministers from around the world. Now, this, of course, can be seen as something that he is sure to bring up due to the issues that India has faced, particularly in the last year in May's Pahalgam terror attack. Now, we move on. Of course, the theme of this year is unity. This institution, the United Nations, can be seen as needing some serious reform. India's bid for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council will also be expected to be voiced, as India, of course, represents the fourth largest economy in the world and is home to 1.4 billion people. So Jaishankar today is expected to champion the global south, in his words, leading forward. Now, of course, development, and we live in a world of conflicts and trade wars. Dr. S. Jaishankar is, of course, expected to speak about these and address them. The Russia-Ukraine war is, of course, ongoing. The Gaza crisis is mounting our social media feeds. These are two topics that have been critical in today's geopolitical climate, and these are also expected to be addressed by the External Affairs Minister. So we will be with you here on NewsX, live in New York, streaming his speech and be covering it until the very last minute. Join us for more.
Thank you, Thomas Porteous, for that. Now we move on in a major development. Now we move on. As Israeli airstrikes and gunfire intensify, 74 people have been killed in Gaza, with most of the deaths reported in Gaza City. Gaza health officials say that dead include women and children, with entire families lost in refugee camp bombings. Despite growing global pressure for a ceasefire, Israel is pushing ahead with its offensive. Gaza's largest hospital is now surrounded by tanks, while other medical facilities are damaged or shut down. Meanwhile, the international anger is rising. Dozens of UN delegates walked out during Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, where he said Israel must finish the job. Meanwhile, the UK, France, and others have moved to recognize Palestinian statehood. Gaza's health system is collapsing, doctors are fleeing, and aid groups like Medicine Sans Frontiers have been forced to suspend their operations in Gaza. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratna. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, we have seen the walkout that happened while Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave his speech in UNGA. Also, the protests that have been happening and growing voices even within Israel to end the war and bring the hostages back. So, given this mounting international pressure for ceasefire, how does Israel still justify its continued offensive in Gaza?
Asuma, it's very good to see you. There are three important things that Netanyahu said. One is he wants the hostages released, and everyone wants the hostages released. Second is he wants Hamas to disarm and surrender. Third is he wants to demilitarize Gaza, because otherwise there will be another attack on Israel in the foreseeable future. What is so important is for those countries, those governments that recognize the Palestinian state, which is the right thing to do, to also ensure that the hostages are released and Hamas disarms, because as long as a terrorist entity that holds hostages is still active and operating, there will be no peace in the Middle East. So it will be some kind of fantasy for those countries that call for recognition of the Palestinian state if they are not going to also ask Hamas to release the hostages, because in the 21st century, one should never allow any group or any government to hold hostages. The final point I want to share with you is that there is a humanitarian crisis. People are suffering in Gaza. The Palestinians are suffering, and it's so important for Israel to work with countries, even those countries that have recognized a Palestinian state, to ensure the humanitarian supply, the relief, the food, and the aid to Gaza. Because if that supply doesn't exist, Israel will not be able to sustain its counter-terrorism campaign. So both these aspects, one is the fighting terrorism, second is ensuring that people are protected and they have enough food and supplies, should continue.
And with that in mind, and now changing the topic to the international recognition of Palestinian statehood, how do you foresee this shifting the dynamics of Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the broader Middle Eastern geopolitical landscape?
The recognition of the Palestinian state by the Western nations is a seismic shift in geopolitics. Why? Because traditionally those European countries, those Commonwealth countries work very closely with Israel. But today those countries are under very severe pressure, especially from their own citizens, that they must make a voice in support of the Palestinian people, and that has happened. But what is so important is for those countries also to recognize that Israel controls the ground. Without working with Israel, without working with the United States, there will be no long-term security and stability in Gaza. Of course, President Trump has just in the last few hours said that he's going to implement a 21-point peace plan and a roadmap to restore security in Gaza, and I hope that everyone will support that peace plan, but that should first include the surrender, the disarmament of Hamas that staged that brutal attack that led to this devastating war.
With that, I would like to thank our guest, Professor Rohan Gunaratne, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. Wide UN sanctions have come back into force on Iran. France, Britain, and Germany warned Iran against escalatory action today as deep UN sanctions on Tehran came back into force following failed last-minute nuclear talks. In a joint statement, the European powers have said that the reimposition of UN sanctions is not the end of diplomacy and that they urged Iran to refrain from any escalatory action and to return to compliance with its legally binding safeguards obligations. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio urged all nations to implement restored UN sanctions on Iran. Rubio has also called on Iran to engage in direct talks with the U.S. after UN sanctions returned. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that the West is sabotaging diplomacy with Iran. Now we are joined by Professor Rohan Gunaratne again for this discussion. Thank you very much, Professor Rohan, for joining us and staying with us. Now, do you think that this is effective, that UN's snapback sanctions have come back to Iran and now raised their rial price to 1.12 rial per dollars?
Asuma, what we are seeing is that although Israel and the US bombed the Iranian nuclear sites, the Iranians have started, the Iranian government, the regime has started to restore those sites, to rebuild the nuclear program. And they are moving to enriching uranium up to 90%. That will give them a functional nuclear weapon. So those countries that have imposed these sanctions, they have to be commended and congratulated, because If they didn't do that, Iran will have a nuclear weapon and the entire Middle East will be in chaos. The Saudis already have signed agreements with Pakistan, UAE, with India to secure their countries to have a nuclear umbrella. So to prevent this chaos of a nuclear Middle East is what the UN has done. UN should be commended for taking this step. Of course, Iran will now face those sanctions, and unless Iran complies, there will even be a blockade against Iran. So it is better for Iran at this point to work with the United States and with other countries to ensure that they do not build a military nuclear program.
And now, given looking at Russia, Russia has this view that the West is sabotaging diplomacy with Iran. They defended Iran in a way. So how do you see the future negotiations between Iran and the US and European nations? And why do you think Russia has made this statement now?
Russia is an ally of Iran. China is an ally of Iran. What is so important for Russia and China also to work with the rest of the world to ensure that Iran does not develop a nuclear weapon. And geopolitics is one, but the global security and stability is more important. So I hope that countries like Russia and China that have large capabilities and influence will work with the West to develop a plan of action where Iran will be able to ensure that there is no nuclear capability. A military nuclear capability will only cause instability and insecurity, not only the Middle East, but the world.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Rohan Gunaratna for joining us and sharing that insight from Singapore. Now we move on. The Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, M.K. Stalin, has said that at least 36 people have been killed and more than 50 people have been injured in a stampede at a rally held by Tamil actor Vijay, who is campaigning for election. Stalin has said that 8 children and 16 women were among the 36 people who died in the districts of Karur in Tamil Nadu during a political rally by Tamilaga Vetri Kazhagam, Vijay's party. In a post on X, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also issued a statement in support of the victims' families. During the rally, visuals showed Vijay throwing water bottles from the top of the vehicle to fainting supporters and calling for police help when the crowd became uncontrollable. High-ranking officials like the Deputy CM of the state and the Tamil Nadu President of the Bharatiya Janata Party have made visits to the hospital where the injured are admitted. Now for this discussion, we are joined by S. Satish Kumar. He's an advocate of Madras High Court, joined us live from Tamil Nadu in India. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Satish,
good morning, Asma.
Thank you. Satish, can you tell us what more should these people or people who are hosting such occasions do to ensure that the rally is safe and there are no deaths like caused by Stampede in this occasion occur?
First of all, my deepest condolences to the families, members of Karur especially. Basically, when the political parties or any other organizations, when they conduct any processions or meetings in the public places, they generally get a police permission. And while you are asking for a police permission, the organization or maybe the political parties, they should give the object and for what purpose and what is the expected crowd, and all those details are supposed to be given to the police authorities, by which the arrangements will be made accordingly. According to the previous meetings of TVK leader Vijay, the actor Vijay, in most of his meetings, we are able to assess that the massive crowd is coming for his, and that it is a first time appearance as he started his political party recently. So to see him or what sort of the object of the political party, what he's going to say, the style of his speech when comparing with this cinematic, dramatic style. People are so curious to know and to see him how he is delivering the speech or how he looks and all those things. So for that the crowd comes, which is quite common, especially in Tamil Nadu, because Tamil Nadu politics is fully based on film industry that we know already. This is quite, in this case what we understood so far, the TVK has given a clear data that the expected crowd will be this much. So accordingly they asked for a broader space by which the crowd can move here and there, and especially in Karur. Even in the previous meetings, when he conducted a meeting in Madurai, or even before the Tiruchi, Namakkal, all those areas, the expected crowd was increasing massively. That is what the report says as of now. So I personally feel that the police, from its intelligence report, they should have assessed to some extent that the crowd expectation will be more when he moves to the, especially he is coming to the Karur area for the first time. So the crowd will be more and people will be watching him, and their expectation and the excitement of seeing him is more among the crowd. So I personally feel that the police would have to some extent given more caution or more preparation by deploying more police forces in those areas. And even the area where he comes from, Namakkal, there's a previous where he gave a speech and he was coming. That time he is thanking the police authorities that his route was made clear for him to move from Namakkal to Koru, the nearby district. But unfortunately what happened, what we understood so far, the place which was given to him is a very, very narrow road and narrow junction place where he was given. So the expected crowd naturally will be from the nearby districts, even from a far away district like Madurai, Dindigul and all. People have come here to see him. It's quite surprising because maybe a film star is coming, and whether he's a political leader or a film star, the excitement is more. So people have come from nearby districts also. So because of that, the crowd was very, very unexpected. But the intelligence department of police, they should have assessed the crowd expectation, because from the morning 11 o'clock, he gave a speech only by 7 o'clock. He reached Karur only by 6:37. But the crowd follow him. There are two types of crowds. One is a crowd in the local area, then other crowd which is coming behind him in the entire road, in the road area. When he was giving a speech at Namakkal, the crowd from Namakkal also reached Karur. So the police would have assessed that, because the crowd will move from one place to other place, and the probability of stampede must be very, very high. So the density of the population, especially in that area, was very high, and the number of police deployed, according to so far the report, of what we understand, that the police deployment was not even 10 to 15%. But generally, when Vijay started his speech, he is thanking the police, and during the course of his speech, he says, "Where is the police? Where is the police?" He is shouting. So it shows that, and there is one sort of a conspiracy we feel to some extent as of today, but it is quite not clear so far, that the power cut happened. So because of the failure of the power and current, the people got they became panic in a very short span of time, and they were unable to hear the speech of Vijay, what he says. And when his speech was in a peak mood, and people were so curious to listen what he speaks, that time the power was cut, and that made the people to get more excited. They started moving towards him. That was the reason for this stampede. This is one reason. And the second thing.
Satish, thank you very much for joining us. That was S. Satish Kumar. He's an advocate of Madras High Court, joined us live from Tamil Nadu. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing that insight. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.